I'm sure you've heard the phrase past performance not indicative of future results. Well, this usually applies to stocks and investing, but it's true of people too. Just because you've had failures in the past doesn't mean you're destined to fail in the future. Just the same as just because you've had successes in the past doesn't mean you're guaranteed successes in the future either. It doesn't put constraints on anybody. And if you've had a hard time, you're feeling stuck, you're feeling behind, you feel like people are passing you by, it doesn't mean you're destined to stay on that same path. We're allowed to reinvent ourselves, and we basically pick the path that we're going to be on. Sometimes if you get stuck in a rut, you just need a little nudge to get you out and get you back on the road. So if you're feeling stuck or lost, it's your choice to get out and of that situation and get ahead. And today I'm going to tell you a little story about all of the times I've had to reinvent myself, sometimes due to failures, sometimes due to things outside of my control, but we're allowed to reinvent ourselves. I've done it many times. I'm going to tell you what I've done. Let's get into it right now. Let's call it chapter one, the struggle. So I've had to reinvent myself multiple times because of failures that I've made. In 2008, when the market crashed, I ended up going broke. I've told that story before, but basically I had three properties foreclosed on me, and I'd been refinancing one property to pay for another property until the whole house of cards came tumbling in, and the sheriff came and knocked on my door and kicked me out of the house, and I had no money left because I'd been struggling trying to keep everything afloat for so long. So at that point, I got in my pickup truck with my dog and what would fit in my pickup truck, and I drove down to South Carolina. And I moved in with a girl that I hadn't talked to in 20 years, that we went to high school, or maybe 10 years at the time, that I hadn't talked to since we went to high school together. And a mutual friend said she was going through some hard times. And so two people going through hard times decided to move in together at the beach in Charleston. What could go wrong there? But I had to reinvent myself because I no longer had I was running a mortgage company at the time, and the real estate market was still in the crapper, so I wasn't going to try to do that. So I just started applying for jobs, and nobody wanted to hire a guy that owned his own business for 10 years. I thought maybe it would be fun to be a bartender. Nobody would hire me as a bartender with no bartender experience. So I ended up getting a sales job where I stood in front of a Walmart with a little card table, and I handed people a free newspaper and said, "Hey, sir, would you like a free copy of the Charleston Post and Courier?" And they'd say, "Okay." And then they'd take the free paper knowing something was coming. And I'd say, "Hey, if you like reading the paper, have you considered getting a subscription to the newspaper?" And I think I got $20 every time somebody subscribed to the paper. So Sundays were my big day. I'd stand out there in the hot sun in South Carolina, handing out free newspapers all day on Sunday, trying to get subscriptions. And that's not what I really wanted to reinvent myself into. You see, one of the keys to reinventing yourself through hard times or struggle is the ability to be flexible and adapt to the circumstances that you're in. Within 3 months, I was the number one newspaper subscription salesman, and I was making a living. I was able to pay my rent in a pretty high rent district in Folly Beach. So, you know, you can reinvent to what you want when you're coming from a place of strength and you just decide you want to change something, which we'll talk about in a minute. You can pick the life that you want. But when life kicks you in the nuts and you're down, you have to reinvent yourself into what you can do. You know, the world isn't always your oyster. Sometimes you got to take what you can get and, work your way up from there. And that's what I've had to do a couple different times. When all that happened to me, I was no spring chicken. I think I was around 38 years old, which luckily was plenty of time for me to rebuild and come back. So let's call chapter 2 the comeback. So eventually in Charleston, I ended up breaking up with the initial girl I moved down there to move in with, and I found a new girl, and we started dating. And a friend of mine who owns a printing company had heard that I was in South Carolina, and he said, "Hey, we're looking for a salesman in South Carolina. Would you be interested?" So I ended up getting a better job. I ended up getting a new girlfriend, and new opportunities started to arise. And but then my landlord decided he was going to sell the house I was living in, and prices had gone up a lot, and I couldn't afford to be there by myself. And I was like, well, I didn't move from Montana to the beach in South Carolina to not live by the beach. I didn't want to live 45 minutes inland. And I told my girlfriend, I pointed there because my wife is over, she's my wife now. I told her, hey, I'm thinking about moving to Florida. Any interest? And she was like, yeah, I might move to Florida with you. So we started exploring the idea of moving to Florida, and she and I moved to Florida and bought a little house, very small, little 810 square foot house, I think, which I was still, I had a better sales job now, and she's a school teacher, so she was making about 50,000, and I was making about 50,000. So we bought a small little house that we had a small little mortgage that we could afford, and we started rebuilding our lives, or building, for me, rebuilding, for her, building a new life. That was the first time she had bought property. She was new to the country. She's from Spain. So we started building a new life. And after we bought that house, a year later, we were able to, because we had a small mortgage, we were able to save enough money, and we bought a duplex. And this is how I'd gone broke the first time, was buying real estate. But I didn't do it smart. I had to learn from the lessons of how I screwed it up the first time, like doing 100% financing, not having any reserve accounts or extra money in case there's vacancies or roofs didn't needed replacing. So this new second time now, I was like, okay, well, let's not do that again. So a year later, we bought a duplex. And then from the duplex, one side of the rent paid the rent of the duplex, and the other side of the rent paid the mortgage on our little house that we were living in. So that made it easier to save to buy the next house. So I was sort of reinventing myself back into a real estate investor, but doing it in a better fashion. And it actually led me to get my real estate license. And I ended up leaving the sales job. Well, the company I worked for lost my big account. That company went out of business, so I got fired, which then transitioned me into being a real estate agent. So I had to reinvent myself again into being a real estate agent and a real estate investor. And that's basically what's led us to, after 5 rental properties, we had enough money we could live on without either one of us having to work. So we thought, hey, why not try out a little micro retirement situation? My wife was sort of getting fed up with her job, and she never thought she'd be in the US. She'd now been in the US for 10 years at this point. And she needed a change, and she had let me do enough crazy things and job changes. I said it was her turn. And she started applying for jobs, and she got offered a job in the Caribbean. So we moved down to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, and I was going to kind of be retired, and she was going to teach school down there. And we'll call chapter 3, is this 3 or 4? We'll call it The Twist. So in St. Thomas, we moved into a resort, Sapphire Beach, if you've been there, right on the really beautiful beach resort. So we had a condo right at the beach there. And she would get up and go to work every day, and I was reinventing myself to basically be retired. I got my real estate license when I got down there, and I thought I'd try to sell a little bit of real estate, which turned out to be harder than I thought, breaking into that market. It's very much a good old boy network. So I was a little more retired than I thought I was going to be. So I reinvented myself into being a retired guy on a Caribbean island, which should be everybody's dream. Everybody says they want to retire to an island in the Caribbean. But it got a little bit repetitive, especially with my wife being at work every day, and to just go sit on the beach every day got a little bit repetitive. And the island kind of seemed smaller the longer we were there. And living in the Virgin Islands, there's a really high pain in the ass factor. The power goes out all the time. The roads are horrible. The bureaucracy is a nightmare. If you have to get your driver's license or get my real estate license or a business license, it's just mind-bendingly difficult. And everything's super expensive, way more expensive than we anticipated. You can do research on how much houses cost and that kind of thing, but when you're living in a small 1-bedroom condo and your first power bill comes and it's like over $500, that's not something that you researched ahead of time, and it's a little bit of a shock. So we finally decided, after being there for 3 years, we just kind of felt like for what we were paying, we weren't getting the value for it. So this first sort of attempt at retiring in the Caribbean didn't work so well. So once again, time to reinvent. We went back to Florida, and we moved. We still had our house. We didn't sell it. We were renting it out while we were gone. So we moved back to Florida, and we kind of fell back into our old lives. And it was easy and comfortable, but we had a lot of fun on that Caribbean adventure. So we decided it was time for a new adventure. So we'll call this chapter 4 or 5, whatever we're on. We'll call it the next chapter. And I'm calling it the next chapter because we're just getting into it now. It's definitely not the final chapter. It's just a new chapter. We just bought a house in Spain in January, and then we had to come back to Florida to take care of some stuff, and then we went back for the summer. So in May we went back, and we just finished 5 months in Spain. In our new chapter, we're going to try to transition to living in Spain, but for now we're going to split our time between Florida and Spain. And so we've been living here at the beach, and we have a house in Puerto Rico, and we lived in St. Thomas. And so we decided maybe it was time to buy a house in the mountains. So we bought a house on a huge piece of property. We have 35 acres on a mountain, and we spent the whole summer clearing land, making trails, and working on the land, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm kind of reinventing myself into a Spanish gentleman farmer, rancher, mountain preserver type of a person. So now that's the point I wanted to make from earlier when I said that when bad things happen and you have to reinvent yourself based on bad circumstances, you may have less choices, but you can get out of the hole that you're in. And later in life, if you're having more success in life and you decide you want to reinvent yourself into something else, like we just feel in Florida, there's less things to do, and we just thought being in the mountains in Europe would give us easier travel, accessibility, and a little bit more variety of towns and things to go and do hiking. So, we decided to reinvent our lives into something that we thought would be more exciting, not because we had to, but because we wanted to, and we have the means to do so. So there's a lot of different reasons you may need to reinvent yourself or want to reinvent yourself, but it's always possible. People who just complain and say they're stuck or everybody's doing better than them, they need to take some more personal responsibility, because where you are is the accumulation of all the decisions you've made to get you to where you are right now. And you can decide to have a new life. You just have to take the steps and the actions to do it. So I hope this might be helpful for people who may be thinking of reinventing themselves, who may need to or want some new exciting life. All things are possible. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you're needing a reinvention, you're wanting a reinvention, or if this inspired or helped you in any way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. If you like this video and you want to see my house in Spain, I did a video tour, you can go check it out here.